Hello, everyone. It's really weird to do a conference online without knowing who is watching you or seeing the audience, but very excited to be here today. My name is Marina, and I'm from the Google team, and I lead one of our programs called Women Will. And I think if we can now pull the slides up so people can see, I can kick off a little bit with sharing with you today about the program, why we're doing it, and where can we go from here. And I'd like to focus the talk today a bit on raising awareness about the world that we live in now and the unconscious bias, and really get everyone thinking of what can everyone do today and tomorrow to continue to support women and build a more equitable society. Great. So I hope everyone can see my slides now. So brief introduction, I already said, I've been running this program at Google for 2 years, and I'm actually based in Singapore, but we do this program globally. So first off, I wanted to share a little bit more about what Women Will is. We started this program back in 2014 in India, and then we scaled to Japan and Indonesia. And since then, we've grown the program to 48 countries. And this program is part of our Grow with Google initiative. And really, it was born with the objective of focusing on bringing economic opportunity for women everywhere. We are aware of the digital gap as well, and we really wanted to focus on that. And, you know, women have been facing similar challenges in the workplace for generations, receiving lower pay, bias that impacts them in the workplace and beyond, facing different challenges that men do when balancing their professional life versus their home life, and the constant media messages that reinforce the stereotypes that women are valued for their beauty more than their capabilities or skills, which can lead to obviously a situation where their contribution towards business success are minimized. So I'd also like to make this session interactive. So if you have any questions or comments, also feel free to add them. I'd love to also answer them. And this is just to briefly share with you the impact that we've had so far. We've trained almost 37 million women across the globe, very focused on supporting entrepreneurs, but also on soft skills like leadership as well. And this is, I felt like it was a timely, some timely data to share of like, why is it needed more than ever to focus on women and in general, like any minorities in times like today. And it's because in times of crisis, not just COVID-19, we see that, you know, gaps for minorities is widened instead of shortened, you know. So all the work that we've been doing to really build more equality between men and women can really be destroyed in a few months if we don't proactively put a woman at the core of our economic recovery or any strategies as we're focused on rebuilding the economy after this pandemic. And this is some data that we know from ILO, for example, that 25 million jobs could be lost, and women are going to be more vulnerable on that front. And we also know that 30% of entrepreneurs worldwide are women, but only 10% have capital, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on. And then, the woman-owned businesses account for a disproportionate share of the finance gap and tend to concentrate in sections with lower profit margins. And all of this as well is within, what we've read from the UN is the shadow pandemic of many, many women being locked down in domestic violence environments. And that hasn't really been, talked about as much. And yeah, this is some more data, but I don't want to overshare on this one. But we also know that, there's 195 million fewer women than men that are literate. That's why also focusing on educating women is a huge priority for us. And access to finance and capital is still a huge issue today in many parts of the world. So that's something that we definitely want to continue to raise awareness and work on as well. So the first thing is, the gender pay gap is still a thing, and we know that it might take up to like 250 years to close this gap. And this starts very early in people's careers as well. Actually, we know from research that women tend to negotiate less than men on their first job, and that's where the pay gap already starts, right? For me, when I think about my own career, when I started working 7 years ago, it didn't even cross my mind to negotiate my salary, because I was just happy to get a job. And that already created like the pay gap in my own career, right? Because at that first stage, I wasn't smart enough to try to negotiate for a salary that I thought, at that time I wasn't worth, maybe. And the global gender pay gap is still 13.4% and represents the average of a wide range of pay gaps across the world. I mean, countries like Belgium have a very low one, but if you go to Korea, it's still 34% to overcome. And also the fact that men earn twice as much as women. So when you take a moment to consider all this impact together that this has, it is far reaching into every area of life, and the disparity that creates a systematic disparity in power and security globally as well. And the other thing that also impacts this as well is the leadership gap. When you look at companies and their C-level executives, is a significant contributor as well to the pay gap and the poor solution design. A lot of people don't agree with quotas because they believe that, sometimes women are only hired on the job because they have to fill in a quota. And I don't think that's true. I think like quotas do help to continuously push companies to create more diverse team. And we also know for a fact that if you have diverse team in your companies, whether it's a small business or a bigger business, you're going to come up with better solutions, because your own company is going to be more representative of users than if you hire only people from a certain background or from a certain university with certain set of skills. So that's very important to proactively have people in the table, that come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, for you to be able to build better products, better solutions, and better marketing campaigns that represent society more fairly as well. So even though women make up for 44% of the workforce, they make up only 5.8% of CEOs. And when you look at other things like Fortune 500 companies, only 27% are currently run by women, and they only represent 20% of the board seats. Again, that's another thing, right? When I was discussing with a friend of mine who's part of a board, you need to also proactively make room in those spaces and allow, if you are part of a board, think about, if you're looking for another person, think about who can that person be, and make sure that when you look around when replacing people in boards and any other environments, like who is the best suited person to keep, creating diverse teams that, again, include women. But I'm not just saying women, diversity has a whole full spectrum. So obviously today I focus more on women because that's my core of expertise, but I'm also a huge advocate of diversity and inclusion. And we've embedded that in a lot of our Women Will programs as well. So I think, again, it's super important as well when you think of leadership, who are you putting at the top, and how can you proactively, include more diverse teams on it as well. And this impacts, the current landscape reaches far beyond each individual's career aspirations. They impact the way organizations are run as a whole and how countries are covered. And addressing these biases that create these inequalities is really essential, regardless of your leadership ambitions. And I think that's, super important to make sure that we are being proactive about these things and have really these open conversations about it. And I'd also like to move on to entrepreneurship, because I know that there's a lot of startups and probably entrepreneurs today here in the audience. And the female entrepreneurship is growing, but it still remains underfunded compared to the male counterparts. And I was recently having a conversation with a lot of women entrepreneurs from across Europe, and one thing that came to the conversation was that actually sometimes women founders and women entrepreneurs find more resources in crowdsourcing and utilizing crowdfunding platforms than actually going directly to venture capitalists or investors. And I think that's a huge problem, right? And we need to still proactively work a lot with investors, venture capitalists, and also even include women who are investors themselves, and proactively make sure that we can push them to include more, to include more funding and investing into women-owned companies. It's not that women are not having ideas. It's just like a lot of them are not being funded, and that's like some data here as well. Like between 2014 and 2019, the number of women-owned businesses climbed 21% to a total of 13 million. But the companies founded solely by women garnered 2.8% of the total capital invested in venture-backed startups in the US. That is, so teams pitching for funding are impacted by investor bias. And that's one thing that I'm sure a lot of you may have heard. There's this initiative that was started in the US by Sarah Chan called the $1 Billion Fund for Women, which is an organization that is proactively working with investors and venture capitalists to see how we can, they can continuously push investors and venture capitalists to invest in women-owned businesses as well. And it's not all bad, of course, progress has been made, but there is still a long way to go for female entrepreneurship as well. And here, just wanted to really share, a little bit of data on, how the funding has been happening. Like, women aren't being funded equally, and this has huge limiting impact on the growth and success of like female entrepreneur and their business as well. At the seed stage, women-only teams raise on average $82 for every $100 a male-founded team raises. And for early stage venture, women fared worse with an average $77 for every $100 a male-founded team raised since 2010. So just like sending some questions like, is this like something that resonates with your experience? And really want to ask the audience, like, what do you think the implications of this is for female entrepreneurs as well? So yeah, I think this is as well something that when it comes to, despite being severely underfunded compared to their male counterpart, female founders actually outperform male founders in terms of revenue a lot of times. And the female founded startups outperform their male counterparts in terms of revenue, bringing $730,000 over a 5-year period versus $662,000 for the men. And when you crunch the numbers, that means that these women-run companies are returning 78 cents per dollar compared to 31 cents for the men. But the reality facing women is that getting funding is frequently cited as one of the top challenges faced by the female entrepreneurs. And as I said earlier, this is significantly influenced by unconscious bias in the funding process as well. And at this point, it is a sad but well-known fact that female entrepreneurs receive a tiny fraction of venture capital funding. And this is, again, back to the unconscious bias, and how can we, proactively work with venture capitalists and really raise awareness with investors on how we can support this as well. And now I'd like to share a bit more about like how did we get here in the first place. So yeah, I think like this impacts the current, the current landscape reaches far beyond the, systemic and personal barriers as well. And this can stand in the woman and leadership are rooted in this unconscious bias. So why does bias exist as well? Unconscious bias is the systemic, is a system of learned stereotypes and assumptions that influence our subconscious decisions and judgments. So if any person who has a brain, you have an unconscious bias, right? It's the same as with judging people. Like you may not be a judgy person, but it's really honestly impossible to go against that first impression judgment that we make. But what we can do about it as well is train ourselves, to proactively identify when we're having this unconscious bias, to continuously educate ourselves. I do this thing where whenever I have like a thought that I feel like it's, an unconscious bias or something that I should fix, I try to call myself out on it and proactively train myself to continue to do that. And I think that's very important, so we can really continuously learning, because as I say, like, being a feminist is not really something that you can claim. It's like a continuous learning path, and I'm learning every day as well as we all are, how to be a better feminist and how to be a better ally, and continuously educate ourselves on all these issues as well. And we are hardwired to have unconscious bias, right? So every day we make countless decisions without realizing it, and I think it's really important as well that we proactively address this and really are aware, so we can create safer environments for us, and also not be scared in times like this to call out other people, right? When you see unconscious bias, I think that's also very important for us to make sure that we can call out when we see someone proactively having an unconscious bias, making sure that we have, create a safe environment to be able to be open to learning as well. And just to go a bit more like scientific as well, the science behind unconscious bias as well. So what do you guys see on this thin slice of information provided in this image? Can you fill it in? What is the emotion? What is the gender? So I think, like, again, when it comes to the definition of thin slicing, I think is how we proactively, from a very small piece of information, we can already make assumptions on what this is, right? We unconsciously and rapidly fill in the gaps, even though we have not been given the full information about what we're seeing. And being able to rapidly discern, and I think it's really fundamental to make sure that we can remove these biases from our brain and proactively, again, educate yourselves. I think it's very difficult, though, to fully remove unconscious bias, but I think we can really educate ourselves to be more, at least, aware and awakened on how we can be better, right? And continuously do better. And there's a whole system of the brain that is devoted to mirror this as well. And this thin slicing really enables the brain to see the whole picture at once, and the brain sees the rest. So when we see someone else stub their toe, we feel it too. When we see fear in someone else as well, it sparks a sense of dread, fear in us too. And when we see others crying or sad, it sparks feelings of sadness on ourselves. So we understand others, not by thinking it, but we feel it as well. And it's part of empathy as well. How you hold yourself affects others' feelings. And it should be noted that some research seems to indicate that also people with autism may be lacking in mirror neurons, for example, which may be a key factor in why many are unable to see or understand emotional cues in the way they engage others. But I think, we are able to relate, and we're able to really empathize, and that's part of, unconscious bias as well, when we are see only a small part but assess the whole thing. And if we break down the 4 key areas of gender biases, there's 4 that we like to explain. One of them is on likability bias. There's another one on performance attribution bias, maternal bias, and performance evaluation bias. And I'll explain a little bit about this. And this was taken from the McKinsey & Co. Woman in the Workplace. If you want to read more about it, it's from 2016. And likability bias is that success and likability are positively correlated to men. So negatively correlated for women and is creating a double bind for women, right? If a woman is competent, she doesn't not seem nice enough. If she seems nice, she's not considered as competent. This bias often surfaces in the way women are described, both in passing and in performance reviews. So woman asserting herself is often called aggressive, ambitious, or out of herself, while a man doing the same thing is seen as confident, strong, and a woman can and do face penalties in the workplace due to this bias. Same thing as, like, when a woman is bossy, and when a man is acting exactly the same way, he's not being called bossy, but a woman somehow ends up being called bossy. So all these create the biases as well. On the performance evaluation bias, the male performance is often overestimated compared to female. So this is more pronounced when review criteria is unclear. So evaluators are more likely to rely on gut feelings and personal inferences. Does this help explain why women are typically hired and promoted based on what they have already accomplished, while men hired and promoted are based on their potential? And I think this is actually like something that it's like a penalty for women, right? The fact that a lot of times this is true. Like, instead of like being promoted because of your accomplishments, men tend to be promoted a lot of times for their potential, whereas for women it needs to be constantly justified and proven by a track record. And also the third one would be the maternal bias. So motherhood also triggers assumptions that women are less committed to their careers because they're held to higher standards and presented with fewer opportunities. And this also sticks for fathers who take time away from work and for family reasons. And also, this is something that when women take time off for maternity leave, this also impacts their careers, right? Because if they were on the track to get a promotion, then they take time off for maternity leave and then they don't get promoted at the same time. Whereas a man, for example, who had started the career at the same time, it doesn't affect them, right? And this is like, how can we create better conciliation policies to make sure that this doesn't affect women less than men, I would say. And then the last one would be the performance attribution bias. So women are given less credit for successful outcomes and blamed more for failure. So men attribute success to internal factors and women to external, like working hard, getting lucky, or help from others. They receive less credit and give themselves less credit as well. Eroded confidence is less likely to put themselves forth for promotions and stretch assignments. So, some questions I don't know if you want to comment on YouTube, but, have any of you in the room, have you experienced this or have you seen this type of biases firsthand? And, also would like you to think, what are some ways that you can overcome these biases, and how do we shape the role of women in the workforce of tomorrow to overcome them together? And also love for the men in the room as well, because I think it's very important for men to understand that they need to be a huge part of the solution for reaching gender equality as well. This is just like one of the example, right? This is a co-founder of AirWallex, and she won the 2018 Female Entrepreneur of the Year in FinTech. She's 26 and she was featured on Forbes 30 Under 30 and received, challenges as a female. Her age has also created additional barriers for her, especially in an Asian market where young women tend to play a more supporting versus a leading role traditionally. It would be challenging to create leadership authority for young female entrepreneurs in particular. So, yeah, I think, just an example of someone who's, young and successful. And I think it's very important when you think about people in these positions to establish authority from the very beginning and never be afraid to talk about or showcase your credentials, never be afraid to address the elephant in the room as well. Some people have concerns about how young I am, but I'm the one with the most experience in this field. And I've also experienced this at work before myself. Sometimes I was the young person in the room, but I was the one leading certain projects, and sometimes I had to deal with questions to the people I was presenting to, being director to managers versus myself, just because they see me as the younger person and not as experienced. And then my manager obviously bounces the ball back to me because I was the one who has the answers. So I think this is very important as well for us to be aware. And also, these biases as well, they represent a commercial opportunity that can't be ignored. So, we contribute, women in general, a lot to the consumer spending every year, and is a bigger growth market than China and India combined as well, and we account for like 85% of consumer purchases. So I think that ignoring these biases and not addressing them proactively, it's a missed opportunity as well. Same for the entrepreneurship field. And at the end of the day, is also when you think about marketing and marketing campaigns, and I'm sure there must be a few marketeers in the room as well. But yeah, I think like, if you keep putting women in stereotypical roles, then you're missing an opportunity as well for your own products, because women are not they don't want to be stereotyped anymore. Like, and also when you think about women who are thinking of careers in the STEM and other fields, like this starts when really women are very young and they're choosing their careers. Sometimes they struggle because women, when they're young, they're being bought like like a doll or things to play, household wife or kind of thing. Whereas since very young, boys are being given like things like engineering, like mechanical things, like things to fix. So I think that's something that we need to address at a very early stage. And obviously a lot of steps are being taken today, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done in that field. And I mean, this is more like a question for the room. I'd love for all of you as well to think about which of these forms of biases have you experienced yourself, and what assumptions have people made about you? And this, even for the men as well, like men are also, they face unconscious bias as well. So I'd like for you guys to take a moment as well to think about this, answer this question for yourself. If you want to type it in, feel free to do so as well. Yeah. And then this is just wanted to also talk about like overcoming the discomfort with talking about unconscious bias. These are like 4 things on, I mentioned earlier that it's important to really proactively call people out and make sure that they can understand as well, like and they're open to learning and normalizing the conversation about unconscious bias. This is really essential to mitigating its impacts. And in order to normalize these conversations, we need to be comfortable to have them often in a variety of environments, not just at work, but really, with your family, with your friends. I think these are very, very important conversations. And these are 4 key elements to creating a constructive conversation about unconscious bias. Leading with respect and curiosity. I think really understanding your own and other people's unconscious biases requires respectful and curious questions. Bringing a learning mind to all your conversations will enable you to maintain an open mind and refrain from making assumptions. The second one is about removing the stigma, right? As we have discussed, if you have a brain, you have unconscious bias. That's a fact. And therefore, our conversations, they need to be about mitigating our unconscious bias rather than claiming that people should be 100% free from it, as this will only increase the stigma and make people fearful of speaking about their unconscious bias. It's okay. Like, we all have sometimes not so great thoughts. We just need to be open about it and really admit it, right? Avoid generalizations and us versus them type of language. I think the root of unconscious bias is generalizations, right? So be careful not to fall into the trap of making sweeping statements that are not universally true, as this can alienate you, those around you. And then the final one is like maintaining a psychologically safe environment. Conversations about unconscious bias can be challenging, as different people's idea of what is good or right are often different. So for this reason, maintaining a psychologically safe environment can make the difference between a constructive and destructive conversation. And psychologically safe environments require that failure or getting it wrong is okay as long as you're learning, and that those around you will meet you with empathy. And just to wrap it up, if you want to also follow Woman Will on Instagram, you can go. Our handle is pretty easy. It's Woman Will. If you want to learn more, we're continuously sharing stories of women or data to educate people around the gender gap. And yeah, just like think about what woman will and what will you do today to support gender equality. And thank you very much, everyone. I know I have only 1 minute left. So here's some recap that you can read out of some of the things that we talked about today. I hope you found this session useful. If you have any comments, I believe you can put on YouTube, but we don't have any time to to address them. So thank you very much for your time.